Hi everyone. Last Sunday, I led a church service on social media where a young girl uh, brought a cross and pronounced a blessing upon the congregation. It was a very humbling experience to be blessed by a child, but it left me wondering whether we who are adults are always equally a blessing to children. The beginning of September is going to be a time of change for thousands of children in Manchester, including that girl who pronounced the blessing upon us that day. She and all the others will be going back to school for the first time in nearly 6 months. For everyone involved in schools, there's bound to be a lot of anxiety. The exam fiasco this summer has placed the spotlight on the Department of Education, who want to get everything right when children return to school. So no doubt government, local education authorities, school governing bodies will be very concerned that this week goes well. Teachers are worried too, because they're being placed under an enormous amount of pressure to not just teach in a much changed environment, but act also in some senses as social police and healthcare workers. They must also inevitably be aware of the added risk of the particular that is there for older staff through potential greater exposure to virus. Many parents, carers and families will be worried too, even though their children seem to be relatively safe from the effects of the virus. The danger for families of being with children who've been mixed in classrooms and on corridors may create a greater risk of infection that's deadly to more vulnerable members, particularly of BME communities and multi-generational families. Yet, nevertheless, despite all of these anxieties amongst most of the population, I have a feeling that the greatest anxiety will be that experienced by the children themselves. When I was a child, I have to confess that I always had very mixed feelings about going back to school after the school summer holidays, and I won't be surprised if the children today have mixed feelings too. Of course, despite going back to a very much changed environment, some children will be absolutely delighted to be able to get back to see their friends and enjoy the camaraderie of learning new things with others. For some indeed, school is a valuable escape from perhaps a troubling home life. Yet for many others, the experience may be more nuanced and challenging. A recent report on a study from the University of Bristol looked at a random mix of 1,000 secondary age children during both October last year and then again in April this year, just as the pandemic was reaching its height. And this study found that against all expectations, many children were actually less stressed during the lockdown than they were when they were at school during normal times. This raises some important and troubling questions. How can it be that children are less stressed, forced to stay at home at a time of dangerous pandemic, than in more normal times when they're attending school? What's causing them stress? Is it the pressure of study? Is it bullying? Is it the sense that they are lost and a little more than a number in large comprehensive schools? The questions are legion. We don't have answers to all of them. Maybe the pandemic is allowing us to notice some important things about our children and our schools that we mustn't forget or ignore as we rush to get children to go back to school. For what it's worth, having been a chair of a governors of a primary school for 10 years and vice chair of a pupil referral unit for a similar length of time, I think that the challenge we face is how do we make all children, and particularly teenagers, feel truly valued and cared for? Over the last 10 to 15 years, schools have been subjected to a blizzard of legal changes in an effort to promote higher standards and give children a better education. Many schools now are independent academies. They are pretty much used to constant changes of both curriculum and exam system. Unfortunately, all this change has not necessarily produced the intended outcome. Hard-working teachers have been run ragged. Yet we know from independent studies that English children are amongst the most unhappy in the whole of Europe. Why is this? Thankfully, because of brilliant teachers and some fine schools, there will be many exceptions. Yet sadly, I think too often we've managed to lose sight of the whole child. We've become obsessed with targets and rules and exam results, and we've lost sight of the purpose of education, which is for children to grow to be whole and rounded, and hopefully, as far as possible, reasonably happy people. I'm not advocating doing away with testing, but somehow the balance is wrong. St. Paul tells us that Christians in Rome, that he once thought he could become whole by keeping the law, but found that that way was impossible. What was required wasn't the law, but grace and mercy, the grace and mercy of God that he met in Jesus. This gracious love is the only thing that could save him and us. In our readings this week, Paul says that love is the fulfillment of the law. Is it far too namby-pamby to talk about love in the context of the education system? Some people will think so. Yet my feeling is that our children need to experience rather more love and a good deal less legalism. There's an old English word that I think should apply. It is the word cherished. Children of all ages need to know that they are cherished. And maybe government, Department of Education, teachers, and indeed all of us need to focus more on how we achieve that vital target before we try to achieve anything else.